So next technique for the third scale down is called stippling. And what stippling is a buildup of little dots or marks to create your value. So when I stipple, I like to actually kind of move the pen around in a circle to get a bigger dot. If you do this kind of thing, you can get a smaller mark. You have a little bit less control with that kind of approach versus this because it's slower, but it does go a little bit faster. Sometimes I use a combination of both types of mark making for stippling. I started this square already, the darkest dark, because as you can imagine, building up enough marks to get to that darker value takes a long time. So I already got a few layers on there so that you wouldn't have to sit here and watch me do it from start to finish. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory by this point, but the more marks you build up, the deeper the value. So you just work in layers, same way, only this is the most time-consuming way. Stippling is not my favorite. I like the way it looks. I always like the way stippled artwork looks. But for me, it just takes so long. I like to work a little faster than that. There are times where you might want to make something look textured. And this does create, I mean, you can see that each one of these techniques creates sort of an interesting texture. And you could see that stippling might be what you're going for to create sort of like a rough looking texture, emulate a rough looking texture. So there are times that I use it. Typically in a pen drawing, I would use a combination of all the techniques and just find which technique is appropriate for which surface I'm trying to shade. So in this square, I purposely left the left of it just a little bit lighter so that you are able to watch me build up more layers to get it to the darker value. I just want to note too that when you're doing your darkest value for stippling, don't stipple until the square is completely solid. All right, there are going to be specks of white showing through. If there's an area where you ever want to shade and make it look like solid value, solid dark value, you would just color it in solid. I mean, to try to stipple up to that point is sort of silly, right? So there are going to be specks. It's going to look like static on a TV screen. I'm going to leave this one like this for now. I have a feeling I'm going to need like 1 or 2 more layers to make it really read as my darkest, but I'll stop it there for now and build it up later if I have to. So just to demonstrate the second one, the way I began with the darkest dark was the same way I'm going to begin with my second to darkest. And what I'm doing is I'm just putting an even distribution of dots or specks, however you want to look at them, throughout the square first as a base. So I'm spreading them out somewhat evenly, just eyeballing it. I know that it's second to darkest, so it's still gonna be pretty dark, so I'm doing bigger dots instead of just like teeny ones like this to start. Now clearly that's a big jump, right? Sometimes you have to squint at it. When I stipple, I'll usually pick it up and hold it at arm's length and sort of squint at it to get it looking more like it's a blur of gray instead of just individual dots. And this is clearly too big of a jump. This is something that you might see over on this end of the scale, right? So just more layers are needed. Switching over to this little speckly technique. You'll find that after a while your hand kind of hurts. Just stop and take a break if that happens. And still with that layer, it's still reading as kind of like a mid to light tone. So I'm going to hit it up with a few more layers before I call it quits and move to the next one. You can stay consistent if you want to and do your first darkest if that's the way you've been doing it, and then skip over to your second lightest just to have those 2 end caps kind of established before you do your 3 in between. Just to demonstrate the lightest next to the white so you can get an idea. I'm going to apply less pressure. The dots are smaller. I'm not pressing down hard. I'm just letting it be, just letting it, the tip of the pen just touch the paper, not pressing down a lot. So you can see the difference that has doing that sort of a movement versus making actual dots. Save that for this end of your value scale. And do this technique for the lighter values. So that might actually be too light. It might actually be perfect. Not sure yet, but as I've been saying right along, leave it lighter for now. Get these other 2 done, finish up this one, you know, and then decide. Maybe just hit it with one more single layer to bring it up, step up from the lightest light. All right, and for your final scale, you are going to play around with some freestyle. You can call it scribbling, but I prefer to call it freestyle pen techniques. And you can basically make up whichever kind of a technique you want. Any sort of buildup of marks, no matter what the marks are, will create a certain type of value, all right, a certain value. Just the more you build it up, you know by now, the deeper the value, the darker the value. So you could get really creative with this. You could get into some interesting patterning that's either tighter together or more dispersed for a lighter value. I'm gonna let you just have fun with this. One thing that you can do is what I have here. I got some, whoops, will this go this far? I've got some dual technology here. I went online and just found some different ideas for some things. So you can do that if you get to your 5th box and you're kind of stumped. There's lots of ideas out there for you. Or if you just want to be creative and do your own thing in each square, that is fine. And obviously the challenge with this one, I mean, every one of these has their own particular challenge, right? The challenge with this one is figuring out like a pattern or a texture that's going to be appropriate for whichever value you're doing. So like for this first one that I'm going to do, I'm going to use a blue pen for this last one just to see the difference. The first one that I'm going to do, I'm not going to choose a pattern that would take a really long time for my darkest value, because if it's some kind of pattern that's complicated, I'm going to be at it for a while because it's my darkest value. I might want to do something like that for one of these values over here. So I'm going to choose, for me anyway, I mean, you might want to take some time with it, but for me anyway, I'm going to choose, I think I'll do this first darkest one. I think I'll just do scribbles like this. And same way, just apply a layer. And then build up your layers once you have that. I might even, actually, I think what I'll try to do is, I notice after I did that it creates like lines going this way, so I think I'll do another layer in the opposite direction. Almost like cross-hatching with squiggles. So you don't have to do it this way for your first one. You can come up with your own way. These boxes are free, but I still want you to try to make them evenly step down from dark to light as much as possible. So although they will not be completely uniform going across, they'll be in different styles, they should step down evenly from one value to the next. I want you to try to get your values going right to the edges of each box. So some other options you could do for some of your other squares is do kind of like a tight linear pattern. Something like that. You know, something more curved. Play around with direction. I mean, it could be you could try to do a combination of, say, stippling an arrangement of small dots and big dots, but then, you know, see what happens when you try to do some hatching over it. That's kind of nice. So try to combine some of these different techniques. I'm gonna leave it up to you. And then, as I said before, the challenge is, all right, well then for this lighter one, I need to make sure I don't go overboard. So I have to choose a technique that lends itself to working a little bit more spread out and less heavy-handed.